Book the Third, Chapter 2 of Armadale. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michael Anthony Petronic. Armadale by Wilkie Collins. Neelie entered the room carrying the tray with the tea, the dry toast, and the pat of butter which composed the invalid's invariable breakfast. "What does this mean?" asked Miss Milroy, speaking and looking as she might have spoken and looked if the wrong servant had come into the room. Neelie put the tray down on the bedside table. "I thought I should like to bring you up breakfast, mamma, for once in a way," she replied, "and I asked Rachel to let me." "Come here," said Miss Milroy, "and wish me good morning." Neelie obeyed, and as she stooped to kiss her mother, Mrs. Milroy caught her by the arm and turned her roughly to the light. There were plain signs of disturbance and distress in her daughter's face. A deadly thrill of terror ran through Mrs. Milroy on the instant. She suspected that the opening of the letter had been discovered by Miss Gwilt, and that the nurse was keeping out of the way in consequence. "Let me go, mamma," said Neelie, shrinking under her mother's grasp. "You hurt me." "Tell me why you brought up my breakfast this morning," persisted Miss Milroy. "I have told you, mamma." "You have not. You have made an excuse. I can see it in your face. Come, what is it?" Neelie's resolution gave way before her mother's. She looked aside uneasily at the things in the tray. "I've been vexed," she said, with an effort, "and I didn't want to stop in the breakfast room. I wanted to come up here and speak to you." "Vexed? Who has vexed you? What has happened? Has Miss Gwilt anything to do with it?" Neelie looked round again at her mother in sudden curiosity and alarm. "Mamma," she said, "you read my thoughts. I declare you frightened me. It was Miss Gwilt." Before Mrs. Milroy could say a word more on her side, the door opened and the nurse looked in. "Have you got what you want?" she asked, as composedly as usual. "Miss, there, insisted on taking your tray up this morning. Has she broken anything?" "Go to the window. I want to speak to Rachel," said Mrs. Milroy. As soon as her daughter's back was turned, she beckoned eagerly to the nurse. "Anything wrong?" she asked, in a whisper. "Do you think she suspects us?" The nurse turned away with her hard, sneering smile. "I told you it should be done," she said, "and it has been done. She hasn't the ghost of a suspicion. I waited in the room, and I saw her take up the letter and open it." Mrs. Milroy drew a deep breath of relief. "Thank you," she said, loud enough for her daughter to hear. "I want nothing more." The nurse withdrew, and Neelie came back from the window. Mrs. Milroy took her by the hand, and looked at her more attentively and more kindly than usual. Her daughter interested her that morning, for her daughter had something to say on the subject of Miss Gwilt. "I used to think that you promised to be pretty, child," she said, cautiously resuming the interrupted conversation in the least direct way. "But you don't seem to be keeping your promise. You look out of health and out of spirits. What is the matter with you?" If there had been any sympathy between mother and child, Neelie might have owned the truth. She might have said frankly, "I am looking ill because my life is miserable. I am fond of Mr. Armadale, and Mr. Armadale was once fond of me. We had one little disagreement, only one, in which I was to blame. I wanted to tell him so at the time, and I have wanted to tell him so ever since, and Miss Gwilt stands between us and prevents me. She has made us like strangers. She has altered him, and taken him away from me. He doesn't look at me as he did. He doesn't speak to me as he did. He is never alone with me as he used to be. I can't say a word to him that I long to say, and I can't write to him, for it would look as if I wanted to get him back. It is all over between me and Mr. Armadale, and it is that woman's fault. There is ill blood between Miss Gwilt and me the whole day long. And say what I may, and do what I may, she always gets the better of me, and always puts me in the wrong. Everything I saw at Thorpe Ambrose pleased me. Everything I did at Thorpe Ambrose made me happy before she came. Nothing pleases me, and nothing makes me happy now." If Neelie had ever been accustomed to ask her mother's advice, and to trust herself to her mother's love, she might have said words as these. As it was, the tears came into her eyes, and she hung her head in silence. "Come," said Mrs. Milroy, beginning to lose patience. "You have something to say to me about Miss Gwilt. What is it?" Neelie forced back her tears, and made an effort to answer. "She aggravates me beyond endurance, mamma. I can't bear her. I shall do something Neelie stopped and stamped her foot angrily on the floor. "I shall throw something at her head if we go on much longer like this. I should have thrown something this morning if I hadn't left the room. Oh, do speak to papa about it. Do find out some reason for sending her away. I'll go to school. I'll do anything in the world to get rid of Miss Gwilt." To get rid of Miss Gwilt! At those words, at the echo from her daughter's lips of the dominant desire kept secret in her own heart, Mrs. Milroy slowly raised herself in bed. What did it mean? Was the help she wanted coming from the very last of all quarters in which she could have thought for looking for it? "Why do you want to get rid of Miss Gwilt?" she asked. "What have you to complain of?" "Nothing," said Neelie. "That's the aggravation of it. Miss Gwilt won't let me have anything to complain of. She is perfectly detestable. She is driving me mad. And she is the pink of propriety at all the time. I dare say it's wrong, but I don't care. I hate her." Mrs. Milroy's eyes questioned her daughter's face as they had never questioned it yet. There was something under the surface, evidently something which might be of vital importance to her own purpose to discover, which had not risen into view. She went on probing her way deeper and deeper into Neelie's mind, with a warmer and warmer interest in Neelie's secret. "Pour me out a cup of tea," she said, "and don't excite yourself, my dear. Why do you speak to me about this? Why don't you speak to your father?" "I have tried to speak to papa," said Neelie, "but it's no use. He is too good to know what a wretch she is. She is always on her best behavior with him. She is always contriving to be useful to him. I can't make him understand why I dislike Miss Gwilt. I can't make you understand. I only understand myself." She tried to pour out the tea, and in trying upset the cup. "I'll go downstairs again," exclaimed Neelie with a burst of tears. "I'm not fit for anything. I can't even pour a cup of tea." Mrs. Milroy seized her hand and stopped her. Trifling as it was, Neelie's reference to the relations between the Major and Miss Gwilt had roused her mother's ready jealousy. The restraints which Mrs. Milroy had laid on herself thus far vanished in a moment, vanished even in the presence of a girl of 16, and that girl her own child. "Wait here," she said eagerly. "You have come to the right place and the right person. Go on abusing Miss Gwilt. I like to hear you. I hate her too." "You, mamma?" exclaimed Neelie, looking at her mother in astonishment. For a moment Mrs. Milroy hesitated before she said more. Some last left instinct of her married life in its earlier and happy time pleaded hard with her to respect the youth and the sex of her child. But jealousy respects nothing, in the heaven above or on earth beneath, nothing but itself. The slow fire of self-torment, burning night and day in the miserable woman's breast, flashed its deadly light into her eyes, as the next words dropped slowly and venomously from her lips. "If you had had eyes in your head, you would never have gone to your father," she said. "Your father has reasons of his own for hearing nothing that you can say, or that anybody can say, against Miss Gwilt." Many girls at Neelie's age would have failed to see the meaning hidden under those words. It was the daughter's misfortune, in this instance, to have had experience enough of the mother to understand her. Neelie started back from the bedside, with her face in a glow. "Mamma," she said, "you are talking horribly. Papa is the best and dearest and kindest—" "I won't hear it! I won't hear it!" Mrs. Milroy's fierce temper broke out in an instant, broke out all the more violently from her feeling herself, in spite of herself, to have been in the wrong. "You impudent little fool!" she retorted furiously. "Do you think I want you to remind me of what I owe your father? Am I to learn how to speak of your father, and how to think of your father, and how to love and honor your father, from a forward little minx like you? I was finely disappointed, I can tell you, when you were born. I wished for a boy, you impudent little hussy. If you ever find a man who is fool enough to marry you, he will be a lucky man if you only love him half as well, a quarter as well, 100,000th part as well as I loved your father. Ah, you can cry when it's too late. You can come creeping back to beg your mother's pardon after you have insulted her. You little dowdy, half-grown creature! I was handsomer than you will ever be when I married your father. I would have gone through fire and water to serve your father. If he had asked me to cut off one of my arms, I would have done it. I would have done it to please him." She turned suddenly with her face to the wall, forgetting her daughter, forgetting her husband, forgetting everything but the torturing remembrance of her lost beauty. "My arms," she repeated to herself faintly. "What arms I had when I was young!